People all over the country are clamoring for Cabbage Patch Kids. It's like a fever taking hold.
On November 27th in 1983, in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, 1,000 people gathered anxiously awaiting the doors of the Czar department store to open. Parents looked around doing quick math. There are only 240 Cabbage Patch dolls in that store, and 3 out of every 4 of us won't be getting a doll. In order to be a part of the few, the proud, the brave, you cannot be weak. If you see a weakling with a doll, they don't deserve it. Yes, even if it's a child. You grab the doll, it's better a stranger cry and have their holiday ruined because you can't go back and tell your own kid that you weren't strong enough to get them the doll that they deserve.
Is that what Christmas is about?
I agree with you 100%.
A full-grown woman taking a doll out of a child's hand?
None of this was really about the dolls anyway.
Each doll is different, and you can pretend to adopt them.
For kids, it was just like any other fad. They didn't want to be the only one on the block that didn't get a doll. For parents, it was about proving you could provide for your kids, proving you loved them, and that you were a good dang person after all. When the doors opened to the store, a stampede of hopeful parents and children raced to the shelves. Store employees were scared. Some customers left the store in an ambulance. These were the Cabbage Patch Riots of 1983, and they happened on Black Friday all around the country.
In Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, it was a near riot. One woman broke her leg.
Same sort of thing's been going on in stores all over the country.
It's something you can't get, so therefore you want it.
There appears to be almost no limit to what some people will do or endure just to get their hands on an ugly but cuddly item called a Cabbage Patch doll.
Cabbage Patch dolls made Xavier Roberts incredibly wealthy.
No. Just laughing all the way to the bank.
But while he was amassing his wealth, the original creator of these unique dolls was sitting at home watching all of this chaos unfold in utter disbelief and disappointment. This is Martha Nelson Thomas. She created the concept for what would later become Cabbage Patch dolls, and she wasn't making any money during the craziness of this Black Friday. But what's worse is she never wanted her dolls to be mass-produced in the first place. So what happened? Her idea was stolen from her, and while the Cabbage Patch Riots of '83 raged on, another battle was being fought inside of a courtroom.
I'm Jack Wheat. I'm a lawyer working out of the McBrayer Law Firm. It's a Kentucky-based firm. I work out of the Louisville office.
I reached out to Jack, the lawyer who represented Martha, after seeing him in the Vice documentary and another newer documentary called $1 Billion Babies while I researched this topic. He agreed to share his story with me because he believes it's important to continue telling the truth about the original creator of the dolls.
Martha was from Mayfield, a small town in western Kentucky. Came to Louisville and attended the Louisville School of Art, was her post-high school training. That probably would have been in the early 70s. And while she was at the Louisville School of Art, she became exposed to what in the art field is referred to the soft sculpture medium, where you're working with soft things and forming things out of it. Which eventually led to her doll babies.
After graduating from art school, Martha started attending art fairs and selling her dolls.
She brought them to life. I mean, she would display the babies on children's chairs and in playpens and on tricycles.
All of the dolls, which she called doll babies, were unique because they were carefully crafted by hand, and like Jack said, she brought them to life. This made her dolls a sellout success in the world of art fairs, and this eventually caught the attention of Xavier Roberts.
She didn't want to think of it as a commercial endeavor. She wasn't selling dolls. She was putting children up for adoption, and she would provide papers with these babies, and each one was given its own individual name.
Xavier managed a craft store in Cleveland, Georgia at the time, and he made a deal with Martha that he would buy multiple of her dolls and take them with their adoption papers to his shop. The dolls were an immediate success in the shop, so much so that Xavier invited Martha down for a local art fair near his hometown. But while she was there, he did her real dirty.
If I recall correctly, Xavier discounted his doll babies during that fair to a price below what the adoption fees that Martha was charging. And she decided, I'm barely surviving. I drove all the way to Georgia for this fair to be undersold by the manager of the fair. So she terminated the relationship.
I came across a story in researching this video that while Martha was down visiting Xavier, he showed her around the gift shop, and while giving her a tour, he told her that he would buy crafts from local artists until he could figure out how to copy what they were doing, and then he would just stop buying from them and make the crafts himself.
The more she spoke with Xavier, the more she just did not want to deal with him any longer.
A few years after discontinuing her relationship with Xavier, a friend of Martha's approached her and said, "Hey, I saw that you were selling your dolls at the local airport. Things must be going really well." Martha was shocked, to say the least, because she never sold her dolls commercially. That's why she cut off ties with Xavier. The thought of scaling kind of bothered her as an artist. But she did remember receiving a note from Xavier after she stopped doing business with him.
"If I can't sell your babies, I'll sell them made by someone else." After that, he and his girlfriend apparently disassembled one of Martha's and experimented with the medium and came up with what he was calling little people.
Each baby comes complete with its own name, birth certificate, and adoption papers. Little people that you adopt are the brainchildren of a soft sculpture artist named Xavier Roberts, who signs each birth certificate. And this is Xavier Roberts. You'll find him at Babyland General Hospital in the North Georgia town of Cleveland.
There are two things that I want to point out. The first is in that last clip, you did hear them say little people. This was the original name of the dolls that Xavier started selling after he parted ways with Martha. The name was later changed when he partnered with Roger Schlafler, the president of a company that helped launch and scale Little People into the Cabbage Patch empire. Roger was a marketing genius, and one of the first things he did was change the name from Little People to Cabbage Patch Kids to play on the whole ethos and the mythology of babies being born into cabbages, which is how the dolls were made or born.
Where the hell did all these half baby, half cabbages come from?
The second thing that I want to point out, and this is something that's actually caused me a lot of internal conflict whenever I think about the ethics of this whole story. Martha's original concept of the babies was borrowed, lifted, or even stolen from her by Xavier. But he did expand upon it greatly, and he made the adoption process into this big, grand, almost Disneyland-like experience. That's what the Baby General Hospital was all about. Babyland General Hospital was a defunct small-town clinic that he bought and rehabbed. Was this a cult? It kind of seems like it when you listen to the people. They sound absolutely out of their minds.
We don't sell babies, we adopt.
But other than the copyright infringement and the riots that took place, all of it seemed pretty benign, so who cares?
All this fantasy is making Xavier Roberts a rich man. At the age of 25, he's built a luxury home in Cleveland, and he started an antique car collection.
Well, word of mouth has been our best advertiser. People see one, adopt one, and carry it around, and then it stops a crowd of people, and before you know it, you've got a multitude of people carrying little people.
Well, there's one lady in Louisiana. She's a very nice lady, but she was lonely for a while. I think her husband had died, and she adopted 3 babies, and she now has adopted over 60.
Oh, Martha was devastated. I mean, it's like her children had been kidnapped. He, too, like Martha, was displaying the babies in lifelike children's settings.
Well, we've been selling, fantasy. People want to have a good time. It's just like going to see a movie.
Martha and Jack's law firm eventually sued Xavier, and a legal battle that lasted for years was underway. While it waged on, Martha would often get asked if her dolls were replicas of Cabbage Patch dolls. She was being gaslit by Xavier and Calico Toys, the company that would mass market Cabbage Patch Kids. To make matters worse, Xavier had gone and applied for a copyright of the dolls on his own during trial, even though he was currently being sued for stealing the idea.
Yeah, Xavier's argument there was that they called the copyright office and said, we've come up with this design. It's soft sculpture. Soft sculpture's been around a long time. We didn't create soft sculpture, but we created this design. And the copyright office said, well, if you did, you can copyright it.
And while soft sculptures have been around for a very long time, the adoption papers and the original marketing of the dolls, a concept that Martha came up with, is really what made all of this stand out, at least in my opinion. Had Xavier just taken the design of the doll babies and tried to sell them without the story of adoption, I think it's pretty safe to assume that he wouldn't have had a successful product.
This is a very special adoption agency.
Adoption agency?
Right.
They're little people.
Little people.
Got any 18-year-old little people?
No.
Oh, Jack contested all of this in court, but copyright laws in the early 80s were different than they are today.
But the problem was, in those days, you were required to put a copyright notice on your work. You've all seen it, to see with the circle around it or the word copyright, your name and the year you created the work. She did not do that. So under the law at the time, that is an abandonment of any copyright rights you may have.
One of the craziest things about this case is that had it just taken place a few years later, it would have been a pretty easy win for Martha. But Jack had to come up with a different approach. That's where he came up with the idea to use a reverse confusion argument. He was arguing that because Martha kept getting accused of making knockoff Cabbage Patch dolls, and they did have proof of Xavier working with Martha because of the letter he wrote to her, they were able to start getting some momentum in court, and Xavier eventually settled with Martha for an undisclosed sum of money. But Cabbage Patch dolls kept being pumped into the market, all while Martha had to watch from her home in Kentucky. She watched and was devastated as mobs of people fought over dolls that were supposed to be special. Her boutique handcrafted creation was being commercialized, and what's worse is she never wanted it to be this way.
She quit birthing doll babies after this was over. I mean, it felt like, it was ruined.
But the message here is that there is life beyond the Cabbage Patch. But if your children won't settle for, let's say, a Barbie doll, store owners say they should have plenty of the Cabbage Patch dolls after Christmas. The trouble is, by then, your children will probably want something else.
As I researched this topic, I have intuitively believed the whole time that what happened to Martha was wrong. But I had to try to be objective and ask myself, did Xavier really do something wrong here? The marketing plan was clearly taken from Martha, but it was expanded upon greatly. Martha also had no real desire to go commercial, so what was the big deal after all? I asked Jack about this, and this is what he said.
We could ponder good and bad all day. I mean, competition can get ruthless. Competition is good. I mean, our choice is between a free market or a command market, a communist market where the government owns everything and commands everything, but there are limits to it. It has to be fair. I mean, the law of what's called unfair competition is well settled.
When I finished my interview with Jack, he told me that the one thing he would love to hear from people in the comments was about whether or not they thought Xavier creating Cabbage Patch dolls was something morally corrupt, or did he simply expand upon the idea? And if you enjoyed this video, I would love if you subscribe to the channel. I want to keep exploring cultural history here, and a subscription is a free way for you to support my work. And before I get out of here, there are links to all of the sources in the description of this video, and if you're interested in this subject about Cabbage Patch dolls and the case, and the marketing around the dolls, and why were the 1980s, especially in the early 80s, why was it so crazy? Why were there riots? There's so much information that you can dive into, and it was actually really hard to pick an area to focus on for this project, but I naturally gravitated towards the legal argument, and when I got a hold of Jack, it seemed like a no-brainer. Like, this is the direction that I need to take this piece, and that's what I focused on in this video. I know I left out so much, but you only have so much time. It's a big, broad subject, but thanks for being here, and I will see you again next time. Peace.